Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel. We try to let you know about some great theories and earth-shattering discoveries that you probably would never know about other than on this channel. And, or, it's not like you never find out, but they're obscure and off the beaten path, but we are doing, I think, our 195th Bible Decode today, all coming from the New Testament. We'll get to the Old Testament eventually, but for now, we're looking at the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. Quite a few authors in the last 150 years have proffered books and studies that have been promoting the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. The New Testament was written by the Romans, according to the theory of many authors: Bruno Bauer, Sir Ronald Syme, to a certain extent, James Valentine Hannay, Abelard Reichland, Roman Piso, Joseph Atwill, Henry Davis, James Valiant, and most recently Michael Menescotts, and I'm probably forgetting one or more, Cliff Carrington, and all of them have kind of pointed at the Flavian dynasty of Caesars. That is Emperor Vespasian and his two sons, Emperors Titus and Domitian, that ruled the Roman Empire from 69 until 96 AD. The theory goes that they wrote the Gospels after the war that they were both fighting in against the Jews. And then they backdated the story by 40 plus years. At the same time, they wrote a history of this war against the Jews, where both Vespasian and Titus were basically the protagonists before they became emperor. And they put out this history in 7 volumes under the authorship of somebody named Josephus, Flavius Josephus, because he was an adopted member of the Flavian dynasty. He was one of the court historians living at Rome in a townhouse sponsored by Caesar, and he lived there the rest of his days after this war ended, and his book got a great endorsement from Emperor Titus, or actually before he became Emperor Titus. And the basic idea for the Caesars was that the Romans were just a big pain in the butt to deal with. Ever since the Romans pulled into Judea in 63 BC and took control, they had been beset by an endless series of uprisings and revolutions and wars and riots and terrorism, and more so than any other group of people that the Romans governed, they were super high maintenance to deal with. And they figured that was because of their monotheistic God, who considered them the chosen people. And this God with a small g had a bunch of personality disorders, such as jealousness and zealousness and obsessive compulsive disorder, and a major league smoking addiction to animal fat, and also a tendency toward being arbitrary and capricious, indecisive, and also relatively weak in that he needed to take every 7 days off, which is not good if you're a god. You know, what if one of your people needed help on that seventh day? You're not there. So anyway, as a result, the Jews had to follow all of these different rituals, strictures, practices, kosher food, circumcision, strictures against graven images, animal sacrifice, and marital laws, and it wasn't just 10 commandments; it was like 613 commandments, and they were willing to die to maintain these, and so the Romans took advantage of the fact that they knew that the Jews were anticipating from the prophecies that were in their scriptures. They were anticipating a Messiah, and this Jewish Messiah would be a military commander who would come in and help them overthrow the Romans. And there were a number of candidates and self-proclaimed messiahs who rose up in this war from 66 to 73 AD, the war against the Jews, or otherwise known as Jewish War, or the War of the Jews. And, they ultimately failed, but they did drive out the Herod puppet king of Jerusalem, Agrippa II, and made him flee back to Rome, causing Emperor Nero to send in General Vespasian to put down the revolt. And it took over 7 years. So both Vespasian and Titus were actually injured in the war. And so they had, even though they utterly destroyed Jerusalem and utterly destroyed the Jews in the long run, they still recognized that the resiliency of the Jews, that they would be back. They would be, eventually leading another revolt. It took a while, but perhaps it took a while because of the psychological operation that the Romans ran on the Jews, which was to write a story of a Jewish Messiah who instead was a Prince of Peace and believed in rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's, walking an extra mile with the Roman soldiers' pack, turning the other cheek to oppression, recognizing the faith of the Roman centurion slave owner to be the greatest in all of Israel, and asking his God to forgive the Romans, while never asking his God to forgive the Jews, and going outside the Jewish temple and overturning the tables of the Jewish money changers there to turn graven images, Roman money, into kosher Jewish money to be able to purchase the animals for the sacrifice inside the temple and other offerings. And Jesus excoriates the Jews, merchants who were out there selling the small animals for the sacrifice. So Jesus is attacking the Jewish traditions and rituals while being utterly deferential to Rome. Never once in the Gospels does Jesus say anything negative about the Romans. Probably the most that he does is when he says, "Forgive the Romans, for they know not what they do." But they didn't know what they were doing in context. And he also, at one point, kind of indicates that some of his things are for the Jews and not the Romans. But anyway, he behaves almost exactly as if he was written by the Romans. And the Romans had, this is exactly what they would have done. They created a number of other religions in the first century for psychological purposes. They had a pure monopoly on censorship, on publishing, on distribution. So not only did they have the opportunity to write these, but they were the only ones who had that opportunity. And the Gospels are written in Greek, which was the commoners' language of the Romans. Many of the Roman royals also spoke and wrote in Latin, but Greek was the kind of the major language. And in Palestine, the folks there were speaking and writing in Aramaic, if they were writing at all. Greek was much more of a rare thing. But the evidence gets much stronger even when we look at the patterns between Josephus's War of the Jews and the Gospels. They were clearly written by the same authors, whoever those authors were. They emanated, we know that the author of War of the Jews emanated from Rome. And so it's who we have to suspect wrote the Gospels as well. When you see that in over 40 events, the military campaign of Titus is mirrored by the ministry of Jesus in Judea. For over 40 events, they go to the same places in the same order and encounter parallel events or the same type of events that are spread apart by 40 years, sometimes to the hour. So the odds on that are quite long. Also, many of the prophecies that Jesus makes in the New Testament are fulfilled in the pages of the War of the Jews. And most of them are fulfilled by Titus, including the most important one, which is the destruction of Jerusalem, that Jesus predicts will augur in the second coming, his second coming. So according to the scriptures and Josephus, Titus is the second coming of Jesus. And that is really, I think, about the purpose or the motive for the Romans. They were trying to prune or neutralize or tame or domesticate the Jews, and they were also trying to graft themselves onto the Jewish tradition. So it, goes down and down and down from one generation to the next, but eventually it comes to the Romans, Titus, as the culmination of all of those generations. Also then, when we look at Michael Menescott's work, he goes into the book of Luke looking for parallels and hits the jackpot. He found over 250 parallels between the book of Luke and War of the Jews, meaning that the book of Luke is utterly saturated with parallels. Some of them are very, very strong. Some of them seem more random. They're all there, but you can dismiss some of them when they stand alone. But if you look at the numbers of them, eventually you have to conclude that, well, maybe a few of them could be a coincidence, but not all of them. And then he graphed all of those on a chart using the book of Luke on the vertical axis and War of the Jews on the horizontal axis, plotted all the points of correspondence, and made 5 near-perfect letters of the same size in Latin, APTVS, in the language of the Roman Caesars. They signed their name to the book of Luke. And what we've been doing is kind of bandying about with this Roman origins hypothesis. Now, you know, some Christian apologists can kind of attack it when you know, say it was done by Josephus or Arius Piso, which is what Abelard Reuchlin and Roman Piso both say. Independently, they determine that. Yeah, well, maybe you can dismiss that maybe Arius Piso didn't do it, or maybe Josephus, whoever Josephus was. But the main point is that it was done by the Romans. Christians kind of think that if they can, you know, dismiss it, oh, it wasn't done by Arius Piso, then we're good. You know, then we're okay. We've saved ourselves from this conspiracy theory. But that's not really true. Just because you've disproven that Arius Piso did it does not disprove the Roman origins hypothesis. Somebody from Caesar's palace did it. Not sure exactly who it was. APTVS can give you a pretty good idea, probably. But you know, that's the kind of stuff that Christian apologists do. It's, you know, just a basic deflection. They put up a straw man, attack that straw man, and then think, oh, we're good now. But the amount of evidence that supports the Christian position is nil. All of the evidence that independently corroborates the veracity of the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament is Roman. It's all from Roman royal sources. They created this. This is a psychological operation. And it's an obvious psychological operation if you actually look at it with objectivity. And so we looked at a book of Christian apologetics from Lee Strobel and really showed that he called it The Case for Christ. And it's the book that you're going to get if you have a Christian friend that wants to convert you to Christianity. But what he doesn't know is the Roman origins hypothesis. So many of the cases that he makes for Christ fall apart when confronted with the Roman origins hypothesis, because he usually argues in absentia, saying that, oh, well, there is no other explanation, so we can now say that it was because of God. Well, not if you can say that it's because of the Romans. And if it's logical and rational that the Romans did it, then arguing for a supernatural origin is absurd. Now we're looking at a book of Christian skepticism from this guy, David Fitzgerald, named Nailed. And he kind of goes over 10 Christian myths where they really think they have a lot of evidence, and he shows that they have very little evidence. But he misses out as well because he doesn't know the Roman origins hypothesis. So hopefully we can finish this here today. We're toward the end of the book. He's talking about Origen, the early 3rd century church father, admitted in the mid-3rd century that Christians were only a tiny fraction of the population at that time. Its eventual emergence, Christianity's eventual emergence after a slow, painful crawl for almost 300 long years. He says 300, it's really more like 240 or something, was thanks to the collapse of Rome. During this, and I mentioned he needs to put collapse in quotes. Maybe the Romans didn't collapse. Maybe they just converted to the Roman Church. And they used their weapon called Christianity as a buttress for that. Because it ushered in like 1,000 years of feudalism, which is, what the rich and powerful would have wanted even more than the Roman Empire. So during the centuries that Roman civilization enjoyed prosperity and security, Christianity had little to offer. As long as the Pax Romana held, as long as the Pax Romana held, things were good. But the crisis began with the assassination of the young Emperor Severus, which kicked off decades of continuous civil war and short-lived emperors. As each grabbed power, they needed ways to raise cash quickly to pay the enlarged army. That caused them they started cutting the silver coins and putting less and less silver into it. And finally, in 258, the empire itself crumbled into 3 warring states. A succession of soldier emperors gradually succeeded in briefly reuniting the empire in 274 and 284. Or 274, but in 284, Diocletian was forced to split the empire in half. Citizens of the cities, and I believe Diocletian is known as being one of the couple of Roman emperors who really did persecute the Christians. Most of the Christian persecution is heavily overstated, and really most of it is the persecution was Jews, not Christians. But at that time, especially in the first century, the line between Jews and Christians was very perforated. So Diocletian was forced to split the empire in half. Citizens of the cities were forced into the countryside to go seek food and protection from large landowners, becoming serfs in the process. So, now they got 90% population of serfs, and before they had this kind of democracy, so-called, with a large slave population and a lot of soldiers, but, it was, I'm sure, much better for most people than serfdom. Christianity could not, I'm not saying that it was, equitable. I'm just saying that, this is a heading right into the Dark Ages. This is a step down for the people, and a step tighter for the ruling class. They just needed to get rid of the name Roman Empire and just replace it with Roman Catholic Church. Christianity could flourish during Rome's collapse because it was a well-organized empire-wide social service independent of the system crashing all around it. Again, independent of the system crashing all around it. If you look at the bloodlines of all of the popes, they all descend from Aries Piso. Okay, he calls it exclusivist, take no prisoners monotheism. It had an unquestioning, obedient flock with no compunctions against strictly enforcing dogma and persecuting heretics. On top of all that, it had growing numbers. No question, the religion had everything an aspiring totalitarian emperor could want. But he's making it look like it's just kind of random that this Christianity is here, that is exactly what an emperor would want, when it's easier to think that maybe they designed it that way. So in 395, Christianity finally kind of caught on 100%. Sometimes they give the date of 312 for Constantine, but Constantine was a pagan. And he just kind of accepted Christianity. He didn't say that you had to be a Christian, which is this 395 thing. Okay, now he says Paul, or perhaps an even earlier Christian, would not have had to insert a reference to the cross into the pre-Pauline kenosis hymn in Philippians 2:5 through 11. It's fascinating that this early Christian hymn, perhaps the earliest surviving Christian writing we have, which I would disagree with, and as I believe the Paul material comes later, not earlier, and that's based on the only evidence that they have is that Paul should have referred to the Gospels but did not. So they assume that he did not because he was writing before them. But I've seen much better evidence to suggest that the Pauline epistles were written by one of the Pisos along with Pliny the Younger, who was a younger stepbrother of Aries Piso. So what he's talking about, though, is basically the cross. The symbol of the cross didn't really come around until like the 3rd or 4th century. Earlier it was the fish, but really the dolphin and anchor. And this is the symbol that you see everywhere in the catacombs, the Roman catacombs. And it also is the symbol of the Flavians, or at least it was a symbol that was used by the Flavians. Why are the Christians adopting the same symbol as the Flavians did? But eventually they got with this idea of the cross, which probably comes from the anchor. So this hymn that they're talking about, that's in Philippians 2:5, goes on to tell us that the Savior did not receive the name Jesus until after he died. This author named Price has noted that in the Nag Hammadi texts, the Gnostic Gospels discovered in 1945, the Savior goes by names like Melchizedek, Seth, Dirdakas, Zoroaster, the third Illuminator, and others. So these are other Gospels that were written but didn't get accepted into the canon. Among the elements of Judean life that thrived with the advent of Hellenism were traditionalist forms of piety, revering the holy laws of the people. These laws had been codified in the Torah and were now fiercely debated. Their widespread reverence created a scholastic, Torah-based strand of Judean expression, a halakhic turn that established itself among the common people. So that's not exactly where we're headed here. I guess we're done with this book, and he just went over all the various Christian myths that they think that they're on firm ground with, but they're not. But I have to also, again mention that these series of videos for me called the Reciprocal Church, and I'm trying to basically give you a parachute so that you can bail out of the religion that you are in, because it's not just Christianity, it's really all 5 of the major Western religions are about to go crash. And if you have a parachute, you can bail out. And that includes not only Christianity, which I consider to be the best of the 5, but Judaism, Islam, Satanism, and atheism or scientism, and / communism. So all of these things are going to be proven to be false. We need to have, in my opinion, basically 8 billion separate religions for every single person. They have to develop those religions through their own practice with things that work for them. They can use some of this stuff, like Christianity. You know, it's a limited hangout. The Romans had to put some good stuff in there to, you know, to make you a good person, because the Romans wanted you to be a good person. They wanted you to be hardworking and honest and law-abiding and respectful. And most Christians are that. You know, that's why I prefer it to atheism, because those people are, you know, megalomaniacal and sloppy and mad scientists and destructive. So, and then, you know, there's Satanism. I believe that if Christianity if Christianity crashes, Satanism, which is basically its alter ego, will also crash. Satanism is also just a part of the same psyop of the Romans. There is no Satanism in the Old Testament. There's just a handful of the use of the word Satan, but each time it's used to depict a human, not a supernatural force. A lot of Christians will conflate Moloch and Baal and Ashtaroth as being Satan, but really they are really competitors to Yahweh. All of these gods that we're talking about, Yahweh and Baal and Ashtaroth and Baphomet, these are all gods with a small g that are competing against each other. And so the real Satanism of today is, I think, mainly a Hollywood thing, which was maybe picked up on themes laid down by Dante, Milton, and some other authors from a much later period than, you know, than the New Testament. The New Testament incorporates some of the imagery, and especially the Revelation, the Apocalypse. John does also incorporate some of the satanic imagery. But that whole thing, the only reason that there are any Satanists around is because they hate Christians. And so if you get rid of the Christians, the